The council laughed at humans. The galaxy never laughed again. He had logged 4,800 hours in this chamber, and had never once been surprised. That was the job. Dovin Farask sat at the transcription tier and watched the Fethos Grand Deliberative fill up the way it always filled, upper arcs first, the older species settling into their pale basalt seats with the particular unhurried weight of people who had learned that everything eventually came to them, and he ran his pre-session check with the same 12-step rhythm he had used for 22 rotations. Stylus charge, surface calibration, briefing sheet opened. The sheet for this session was marked. In the column headed expected duration, the word standard. The column headed outcome said recorded. He had seen those two words so many times that they had stopped meaning anything. Today they read like a joke someone had written before they knew the punch line. He would understand that later. Right now, he just logged what he saw. The case was the first thing. It sat on the Tier 8 table, the lowest arc, the one closest to the floor, the one where the acoustics dropped voices before they reached the upper rings, and it was gray alloy, standard carry size, sealed, no markings. The human delegation had placed it there before anyone else in the room had taken their seats. The lead attaché had set it down with the careful, practiced motion of someone carrying something they had carried for a long time and no longer needed to think about. Then she stepped back and sat at the table and did not touch the case again. Farask looked at the case. He looked at the table around it. He looked at the rest of the delegation, 3 people, no rank display on any uniform, none of the decorative credential pins that most delegations wore to binding vote sessions. He entered the following into his log: human delegation present, lead attaché unidentified by standard rank display, 1 personal archive class carry unit, alloy, standard gray, sealed. He was more specific about the case than about the people. On top of the case, placed flat, was a projection emitter, roughly 30 centimeters long, brushed gunmetal, matte with age, a seam of discoloration along one edge where the casing had been repaired at some point rather than replaced. He reached for his equipment reference index to enter the submission classification. Procedure required a logged category for all projection devices before session, and found himself looking at 4 possible matches, none of them exact. The model was old enough that his reference index, which covered every classification in use for the last 12 cycles, had nothing clean to offer him. He selected the closest match and typed, in the margin of his log, classification approximate, equipment predates current submission taxonomy. He had no way of knowing he was correct about this, in a way that went much deeper than taxonomy. No argument had been made yet. No vote had been called. No one in the upper arcs had looked at Tier 8. The session had not technically begun. He glanced back at the emitter. It sat on the case like something that had been waiting a long time to be in the right room. Across the tier, his colleague Yessen Drow leaned over. Drow had 5 rotations on Farask and had the contained energy of someone who had already done their reading. Humans are on the list, he said, in the low register that transcription tier staff used during pre-session. Tier 8. I looked it up last night. Then he straightened and returned to his surface, and that was the whole conversation. Farask typed, session called to address Oreth Compact, pre-session confirmation. Human delegation registered as affected party, 8th of 14. He paused, thought about what 8th of 14 meant. Then the session opened. Stay with this one. What that emitter played, 4 minutes and 31 seconds. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Neither will you. 6 hours earlier, before the Elder appeared at the upper arc, before the footage ran, before the 12 names came up in white text on black and the chamber went very, very quiet. Before any of that, it was a Tuesday. The Fethos Grand Deliberative, Orvancel Station, had been designed. This was not a secret. It was simply never discussed, so that the species who had been in space the longest sat at the top and the species who had arrived most recently sat at the bottom. The upper arcs were pale basalt, worn smooth by centuries of occupancy. The lower rings were the same stone, but newer, sharper at the edges, lighter in color, the stone not yet polished by time. The floor, where the presenting area sat, was black-veined resin, dark and glossy. If you were standing on the floor, the tiers of the chamber rose above you in concentric rings, and every species in the room looked down. The acoustics followed the same logic. A voice from the upper arcs carried downward with full clarity. A voice from Tier 8, the lowest occupied level, was shaped by the room to arrive at the top already smaller, already less than it had started. The architects had built this into the stone. Nobody had ever needed to explain it because nobody had ever challenged it from the floor with anything the stone couldn't handle. Dove and Farask had worked in this room for 22 rotations and had never thought about the acoustics once. The room was the room. The rules were the rules. He logged what happened and he went home. The Orath Compact had been on the docket for 7 weeks. It carried 33 co-signatories, more than any proposal this session, more than most proposals in the last 4 cycles. Farask's briefing sheet listed it under the current session's agenda as Item 1, primary business. He had read the briefing summary the morning of, a tight paragraph that described the compact as a procedural reorganization of advisory representation for species below the interstellar presence threshold. It sounded, reading that paragraph, like a filing chain. He found the operative sentence on page 73. It took him 9 minutes. The compact ran to 140 pages of procedural language, definitions, index citations, threshold calculations, cross-references to prior sessions going back 60 years. He read with his stylus running along the surface, faster than usual because the briefing had said standard and recorded, and he had believed it. Then he found the sentence on page 73, and he read it twice, and then he read it a third time with his stylus stopped. Species below the interstellar presence threshold would not lose their seats. The compact was careful about this. They would retain their seats as advisory positions, assigned to a patron block of the Accord's designation. 14 species. Humans were 8th on the list. He sat with this for a moment. He thought about what the word advisory did to the word seat. He thought about what patron block designation meant for a species that was currently, by the compact's own language, too small to be trusted with its own vote. Then he entered the data into his log because that was the job. Orath Compact, Operative Provision, page 73. 14 species reclassified from independent voting members to advisory status under designated patron assignment. List of affected species on file. Human delegation. 8th. He did not write anything else. He did not annotate. He logged. That was the job. Convener Adjunct Thuval Orathcon arrived at the session floor 11 minutes before the formal open. This was unusual. A procedurally settled vote, 33 signatories, no formal objections filed, 7 weeks on the docket, did not require the compact's primary author to attend in person. Orath Khan had done it anyway. He was broad-framed, rust and amber banded plating across his upper thorax, and he stood approximately 2.3 meters, which meant he occupied the floor the way a wall occupies a room. He carried his slate-blue reading dais under one arm, a Fethos tradition, the dais indicating seniority in the way that rank pins indicated rank for other species. He set it at the presenting position and adjusted the angle by a precise increment that Farask recognized. Not the standard presenting angle, but the angle of someone who had already decided how the session would go. 2 delegates in the upper arcs noticed Orath Khan's early arrival and spoke to each other in low tones. Farask could see their mouths moving but not hear the words. He logged, Convener Adjunct Orath Khan present in person, unusual for procedurally settled vote, noted by upper arc observers. Then he noticed the aide. A figure he didn't recognize was standing just outside the upper arc entrance, not seated, not moving, holding nothing. The aide species was Orani, which Farask recognized from the particular stillness they carried. Orani moved rarely, and when they did it meant something. He had never seen an Orani aide at a binding vote session before. He had never seen an Orani at any session that didn't have an Orani delegate listed on the attendance record. He checked the attendance record. No Orani delegate was listed. He looked back at the entrance. The aide was still there. He did not know what to do with this, so he entered it as a margin note. Orani staff presence at upper arc entrance. Not on session attendance record, function unclear. Then he moved on. Solène Brast, he had her name now, from the delegation's late-filed identification. Commander Yeva Solène Brast, Terran Continuance Authority, military diplomatic liaison, had arrived before anyone else. She was short, dressed in a dark formal uniform with no rank display visible from the transcription tier, and she had not spoken to anyone since her delegation entered the chamber. She sat at the Tier 8 table with her hands resting flat on the surface, not moving. The projection emitter was in front of her, and she was not looking at it. She was looking at the center of the room, at nothing in particular, with an expression that Farask could not classify from his distance, and so did not try to log. She had placed the case on the table the moment she arrived. She had placed the emitter on the case. Then she had sat down and become very still. The chamber filled. Farask had attended 207 binding vote sessions in this room. He knew the sound of a chamber filling, the particular mix of speech and movement that changed in pitch and pace as session approached, the way the upper arcs settled first, and the lower tiers arrived later, and the presenting floor was always last. He knew which delegations greeted each other, and which moved directly to their positions. He knew the sound of a session that was already over before it began. This session had that sound. The upper arcs settled in with the ease of people attending a formality. The lower tiers moved quietly to their places. The Novari senior delegate, a figure so small that Farask always had to adjust his display to confirm she was present, filed a last notation at her station without looking up. A Fethos procedural aide handed Orath Khan a revised document, which Orath Khan reviewed without changing his expression. The aide glanced once at the projection emitter on the Tier 8 table and did not glance at it again, which meant the aide had already decided not to. Farask noticed this and wrote nothing about it. Session opened at the standard time. Orath Khan stepped to the presenting position and began his summary of the Orath Compact, with the unhurried consonants of someone for whom the outcome was already a record to be filed. His summary was thorough. It was procedurally exact. It cited 31 prior sessions of index debate, 6 rounds of threshold recalculation, and 2 independent audits of the interstellar presence methodology. Every number was correct. Every reference was properly attributed. In its second passage, the summary was not neutral. He used the word developmental 4 times, twice in reference to species below the threshold, once to describe the advisory structure being offered, and once, this was the 4th time, in a sentence that began, the developmental accommodation provided by patron assignment will ensure, and which turned a reduction of voting power into a form of generosity. He paused before the word charming, a calibrated pause, deliberate, a half-beat built into his delivery. The assembly has long demonstrated a charming, and the pause before it changed what the word meant, not the definition, what it meant in this room from this height aimed downward. The laughter in the upper arcs was brief. It was quiet. It was the sound of people who agreed with something they did not need to say out loud. Solenbras did not move. She did not look up. She sat at the Tier 8 table with her hands flat on the surface, and she waited. Farask logged. Compact summary delivered language noted as non-neutral in secondary passages. Descriptor developmental used 4 instances. Upper arc response. Affirmative non-verbal. He paused with his stylus. He thought about whether that last clause was within his mandate. It was observation. He logged it anyway and moved on. The floor opened for affirmation. 3 delegations in the upper and mid-arcs affirmed in sequence. Each was brief. Each cited the index methodology, the threshold calculations, the procedural review period already completed. The 3rd affirmation noted, as a point of record, that no formal objection had been filed by any affected party in the 7-week docket window. This was accurate. 1 delegate mid-tier did not affirm and did not object. They sat in their position and logged something on their own surface and said nothing. Farask noted this in parentheses in his log. 1 mid-tier delegate, non-affirming, non-objecting notation logged at their station. He did not know why he felt it was worth noting. He noted it anyway. Then the Novari senior delegate spoke. Her voice from the upper arc camera feed. Farask had to adjust his display to confirm she was speaking. She was that small, was precise, and even. She submitted the index methodology query that had been filed at the prior session and deferred. She asked, formally, whether the interstellar presence threshold as calculated included non-military station presence, relay anchorage personnel, and research cohort transit records, or only fleet registry. It was the right question. It was, Farask understood even then, not a question that would be answered today. Oreth Khan lifted his reading dais by a precise increment and set it back down. The gesture was small. He had done it 31 times in binding vote sessions, always in the same context, and it had always meant the same thing. We have heard you, and we are moving on. The query was acknowledged and deferred to the Procedural Review Committee. No timeline was specified. Farask logged. Novari Index query raised and deferred Procedural Committee assignment. He logged it and moved to the next line of his surface, and then he stopped, because Solen Brast had been recognized. She had not stood. She had not moved to the floor presentation position. She sat at the Tier 8 table, at a level below the sight line of most of the chamber, and when she spoke from there, not from the lectern, not from the floor, from her seat at the lowest occupied level in the room. Farask entered, lead attaché speaking from table position, not standard, no approach to floor. Her voice from that position should have arrived at the upper arcs already smaller. That was the logic of the room. That was what the stone had been designed to do. She said, I have one thing to show the council. It will take 4 minutes and 31 seconds. I ask only that the chamber observe it in full. That was all. Oreth Khan looked at the dais. His hand moved toward it, the increment of dismissal, the gesture that had worked 31 times, and then his hand stopped. He did not complete the gesture. He said in the procedural register, the council will hear the submission. Farask did not have time to decide what to enter. He typed, submission granted Tier 8, lead attaché, duration declared, 4 minutes 31 seconds. Solen Brast opened the case. She took out nothing else. The emitter was already on the surface. She reached forward and adjusted its angle by a small degree. One deliberate motion, precise. The motion of someone who had done it before and knew the exact angle. And then she put her hands in her lap. The emitter powered up. The footage was old. Farask could see that immediately. The resolution was early-era optical, the kind of recording quality that predated most current archival standards by decades. A timestamp appeared in the lower left of the projected frame. The timestamp read in Terran calendar format, which Farask had to convert mentally. 47 years ago, near enough. Station designation. Relay Station Orvaniran, Sector 12 Castle. Farask opened a cross-reference query in the lower portion of his display. He searched the session's submitted docket for any prior filing from Terran Continuance Archive, Station Orvaniran, Sector 12 Castle. The search returned. No prior submission on file. The footage had not been submitted for review. It had not been logged with the session record before today. It had simply arrived in a case that predated the submission taxonomy, and now it was playing. Farask kept the cross-reference display running. He kept his stylus ready. He watched the footage. The station was mid-evacuation. He could see that within the first 15 seconds. The controlled chaos of personnel moving through corridors with the particular efficiency of people who have been trained for exactly this, and are now using that training for the first time. The camera was fixed, mounted, not carried. It showed a corridor junction. In the lower left of the frame, a station manifest overlay was running. 1,203 personnel at time of incursion. Farask read down the breakdown as it appeared. Medical staff, research cohort, support personnel. One line stopped him. Relocated colony school cohort, 91. 91 children. From a colony school that had been relocated to the station, and that was there at the wrong time, and that was now in the middle of an evacuation managed. The manifest said this plainly, by 19 Terran Continuance Authority personnel who had been present on the station at the time of incursion. The word happened appeared in the incident summary field. Farask read it once. He read it again. 19 personnel who happened to be present, who happened to be there. The word was doing an enormous amount of work, and he was not entirely sure the people who had written the summary had understood how much. The footage continued. No score, no added sound, Only what the station's recording system had caught: corridor noise, the sound of movement, the low hum of the evacuation lighting switching to secondary power, and then one voice somewhere off camera. "I have you, don't stop, I have you." Faresk's stylus stopped moving. He looked at what he had last typed. He had been mid-entry station manifest. 1,203 personnel of which, and the entry stopped there. He had stopped typing. He had not noticed himself stopping. His hands were flat on the transcription surface, and the footage was still running, and the word count of his log had not increased in what he estimated, looking at the timestamp, was about 40 seconds. He picked up the stylus. He found the entry line. He continued, of which 974 non-combatant including research, medical, and relocated school cohort, 91 individuals. Evacuation personnel, 19 Terran continuance authority, station presence classified in summary as incidental. Footage. No prior submission on file, cross-referencing, no prior submission found. He paused. He added without fully deciding to. The word "happened" appears in the incident summary field 3 times. It is doing a great deal of work. This was not a procedural notation. He had never written a sentence like that in 22 rotations. He looked at it. He left it. The footage ran. 974 non-combatants reached the extraction point. The manifest overlay updated in real time, the count climbing in steady increments. 91 children. All 91. The counter reached 974 and stopped and held. Then the footage cut to black, and the names appeared. White text, black background, plain font, not the session standard display format, not any format Faresk recognized from the Deliberative's official record system. Just a font, just names. 12 of them, arranged in 2 columns of 6, no rank listed, no designation, no species classification, only the names in the form each person had given them to the station registry on the morning they had arrived. Faresk began logging them one by one as required by submission protocol. Name 1, name 2, name 3. He reached name 4 and checked his pace. Name 5, name 6, name 7. He stopped. He looked at what he had entered. At the margin of his log, not in the main body, not in the submission record, but in the notation margin that was technically part of the permanent transcript, he had written, "Names entered into record per mandate, see also." Footage runtime 0431 origin, Terran continuance archive classification, incident documentation, date of filing, 47 years prior to present session. He had written a cross-reference. A full, formatted, procedurally correct cross-reference linking the names to the footage to the archive to the date. It was a piece of legal connective tissue that joined this moment to a record that had existed for 47 years without anyone in this room knowing it existed. He had not made a decision to write it. He became aware of it the way you become aware of something your hands did while you were looking somewhere else. He looked at his hands. He returned to the name list. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The emitter powered down. The chamber was silent. Solenbras did not stand. She did not speak. She did not look at Orath Khan. She looked at the table in front of her, and she placed her hand flat on the surface of the case. The way you place your hand on something when the thing inside it has already done what it was carried there to do, and the weight of it is still present. Orath Khan did not use his dais. The silence in the room was not the procedural silence between speakers. The gap that meant the next person was about to be recognized. It had weight. It had a direction. It pressed down from the upper arcs toward the floor, and it did not move. And Dovan Faresk, 22 rotations of watching this chamber function with the precision of a machine that had never once surprised him, sat at his transcription station and understood, for the first time in his professional life, that he was in a room that did not know what to do with what it had just seen. He looked at the emitter, small, gray, sitting on a closed case at the lowest occupied level in the chamber. Wrong era, wrong taxonomy, repair seam along one edge. It had been waiting a long time to be in the right room. It was in the right room now. Then from the upper arc, someone stood. Faresk had not logged her entrance. He checked the timestamp on his last entry. He checked the frame of the upper arc camera feed. The Orani elder was simply there, standing at the outer edge of the upper arc at the precise point where the summit seating met the access passage, in the space her aide had been occupying since before the session opened. Farask had no record of her sitting. He had no record of her arriving. He scrolled back through his log to the point where he had noted the aide's presence and found nothing after it. No arrival notation. No seating entry. Nothing. She was old. He knew this the way you know it about Orani elders, not from any visible marker, because their age markers stopped being readable past a certain point, but from the way the room responded to her presence, the way a room responds to a change in pressure. She held nothing. Her hands were at her sides, empty. She had not looked at the projection during the footage. Farask was certain of this because he had watched the feed and he had watched the chamber, and he had not once seen her eyes move to the emitter's beam. She had been watching Solène Brast. The whole time, 4 minutes and 31 seconds of footage, the station manifest counting up in the lower left of the projection, the 12 names in white on black, and the Orani elder had not watched any of it. She had watched the woman at Tier 8 who had placed the case on the table and sat down and waited. Farask's stylus was in his hand. He had not written anything since the 12th name. He did not write anything now. The elder did not address the chamber. She addressed Solène Brast. "Will you give this record to the permanent archive?" she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had been built so that speech from the upper arcs carried downward with full force, and she was standing at the highest occupied point in the chamber, and the acoustics did exactly what they had been designed to do. They carried her voice down through every tier, past the mid-rings, past the lower arcs, all the way to the floor, and it arrived at Tier 8 with the full weight of the distance it had traveled. The chamber's design, built to diminish voices rising from the bottom, had never once been asked to carry a voice from the top to a single person at the floor with this kind of precision. It turned out it was perfectly capable of this. Solène Brast looked up. She looked up from her hand flat on the case, and she looked at the elder and she said, "Yes." One word. It went upward and the room caught it and it arrived small, the way the stone intended, and it did not matter. "Then it will be recorded," said the Orani elder, "that the council received it." She sat down. The silence that followed was different from the silence after the footage. The footage's silence had weight and direction. This silence had weight and stillness. It did not press. It simply was. Farask wrote. He wrote fast because his mandate required a complete log of spoken exchanges, and he had not been writing and he needed to catch up. He logged the elder's words. He logged Solène Brast's single word. He logged the elder's response. He logged the fact that the elder's aide, at the upper arc entrance, had been writing something in a notation device from the moment the elder began to speak, and had not looked up since. Then he logged something he had not planned to log. He logged that Oreth Khan had not spoken, that Oreth Khan's hand had not moved toward his dais, that the dais itself was at the angle Oreth Khan had set it before the session opened, and had not been adjusted once during the entire exchange, and was still there, untouched, at the standard presenting angle, not the dismissal increment, not the procedural acknowledgement position, just the angle of a dais that had not been touched by the person who brought it into the room. This was the 32nd binding vote session of Oreth Khan's record. In 31 previous sessions, the dais had moved. In 31 previous sessions, it had worked. Farask noted this without knowing whether it was within his mandate. It was observation. He wrote it down. The compact had 33 co-signatories. The record had 12 names. The chamber discovered that afternoon that these were not the same kind of number. A procedural motion followed. Postponement pending review, proposed by a mid-tier delegate Farask didn't recognize, seconded without debate. No objection was raised. The session was marked closed at the standard time. Farask logged it all with the rhythm of his 22 rotations of routine, and then he looked at what he had written and stopped. He needed to look up the archive classification for the postponement. He searched the procedural index for indefinite postponement categories. There were 4. The 4th read, matters resolved by prior record, applied when a submitted record is judged by a senior member to constitute a factual predicate that the proposal cannot procedurally supersede. He read this twice. He looked across his display at the elder's words in his log. Then it will be recorded that the council received it. Not an objection, not a vote against, not a procedural challenge to the index methodology or the threshold calculation or any of the 31 prior sessions of debate. A receipt. The elder had issued a receipt on behalf of the oldest species in the chamber, confirming that the permanent record had been received, and the receiving of it had made the compact impossible to hold at the same time. He searched the index for the last time the matters resolved by prior record classification had been used in a live session. Once. A boundary dispute from the previous century. The parties to the dispute no longer existed as distinct entities. He had assumed the classification was historical, the kind of thing that went in the index because the index was comprehensive, not because anyone would ever use it again. He was going to have to file this transcript. He looked at the upper arc. The Orani elder was gone. The aide was gone. He had no entry in his log for their departure. He had no entry for their arrival. He had the elder's words and the elder's aide writing something and then nothing, the way you have the shape a stone makes when it has already left the water. He opened the session's formal attendance log to file his transcript against it and found, as he had half expected to find, that no Orani delegate was listed, no Orani elder, no aide. The attendance record did not contain them. He sat with this for a long time. Then he typed a margin note into the transcript. Senior observer presence acknowledged, name withheld per elder protocol, attendance confirmed by log witness. Farask, D, transcription tier 4. He had never written a line like that before. He did not know if it was within his mandate. He left it. The chamber cleared with the procedural efficiency of a place that had been told the business was finished. Upper arcs first. The oldest species filing out in the order they had arrived, without haste, with the particular calm of people who had just watched something they did not have words for and were processing it by returning to routine. Mid-tiers next. Lower arcs last. No one approached the Tier 8 table. Oreth Khan left. He picked up his dais under his arm and he walked toward the upper arc exit without adjusting it, without the increment, without any gesture at all. He passed within range of the Tier 8 table and he did not look at it and he did not speak, and then he was gone. His procedural aide stayed behind for 40 seconds after he left, standing at the edge of the floor, looking at the projection emitter still sitting on the case. Then the aide left too. Solenbrast closed the case. She lifted the emitter from the surface and placed it inside and closed the latch with the same one-handed motion Farask had watched her use to open it, the practiced, unhurried motion of someone who had done this before and did not need to watch their own hands. She stood. She picked up the case. She said something to the other 2 members of her delegation that Farask was too far away to hear, and then the 3 of them walked toward the lower arc exit, and Farask watched them until they were gone. He was alone in the transcription tier. Yesin Dral had left its session close. The other staff had filed out with the delegations. The room was empty except for Farask and the pale basalt and the black-veined resin, and the silence that was no longer the heavy kind, just the ordinary silence of a room that had been occupied and no longer was. He looked at his log. He read it from the beginning of the session. Pre-session entries, the compact summary, the 3 affirmations, the Novari query, the recognition of Solenbrast, the footage, the names. He read the cross-reference he had written without deciding to write. See also. Footage runtime 0431 origin. Terran continuance archive classification. Incident documentation, date of filing, 47 years prior to present session. He read the sentence about the word happened, doing a great deal of work. He read the notation about the dais not being adjusted. He read the elder's words and Solenbrast's one-word answer and the elder's reply. He read the final entry, matters resolved by prior record. He had been a transcriptionist for 22 rotations. He had logged more than 4,800 hours in this room. He had never once written a sentence outside his mandate. He counted, reading back. He had written 5. He left them all in. He filed the transcript at standard time against the session record and closed his display and sat in the empty chamber for a while, which was not something he had ever done before either. The following morning, Yes, and Drow stopped at his station before the day's first session and read the final log entry without asking permission, the way colleagues of 5 rotations difference read each other's work without ceremony. He read it once, then read it again. Then he was quiet for a moment. Did she know the elder would be there? He said. Farask had been thinking about this since he filed the transcript. He had thought about it on the walk to his quarters. He had thought about it through the night in the particular way you think about something that won't let itself be filed. I don't think it matters, he said. The footage would have been the same without her. Drow thought about this. He pulled a stool from the neighboring station and sat on it, which was not something he did in the transcription tier, which was not a place with stools. He had brought one from the corridor. He had been planning to sit down for this conversation. The compact would have come back, he said. Not to this chamber, Farask said. Not this version. Not after 12 names in the permanent record and the elder's words beside them. Drow was quiet again. He looked at the display where the transcript was filed. He looked at the line about the word happened. She had it for 47 years, he said. Yes, Farask said. She didn't bring it until now. No. Drow sat with that for a while. He did not ask anything else. After a moment, he returned the stool to the corridor and came back and opened his own display, and they began the pre-session check for the day's first session in the way that 22 rotations of routine had made automatic. No argument, no debate, no appeal to the index methodology, just a record that had been waiting 47 years to be in the right room. 3 days later, the Novari senior delegate withdrew her index methodology query. No explanation was filed with the withdrawal. The subregistry logged it as a standard procedural withdrawal and assigned it no further review. 40 minutes after the compact session had closed, Oreth Khan's procedural aide had submitted a review extension request through the standard subregistry channel. It was logged. It was assigned an indefinite pending status. No follow-up was ever filed. The Oreth Compact remained in the docket under the heading Matters Resolved by Prior Record for the remainder of the legislative quarter. At the quarter's end, it moved to the permanent archive without further action. The 33 co-signatories were not formally notified. The procedural rules did not require it. 6 weeks after the session, the Terran Continuance Authority submitted a formal archive access request for the session transcript, standard procedure for any session in which a human delegation appeared on the record. The request was approved at the sub-registry level without review. Farask received a confirmation copy and filed it with the session record. He read the name on the access request, Commander Yeva Solin Brast. She had requested access to her own testimony and to Farask's log and to the cross-references he had written without deciding to write. He did not know what she did with it. He filed the confirmation and moved on. 3 months after that, the interstellar presence index calculation methodology was revised by a joint working group. The revision included, for the first time in the working group's history, a Novari co-chair. The revision's language was procedural. It was careful. It was 12 pages long. It changed the threshold. Farask read it when it was filed in the session record. He read the threshold number. He read the new calculation methodology. He looked up how many of the 14 species on the Oreth Compacts list would fall above the new threshold under the revised calculation. He did not write this in his log. He did not need to. The emitter was back in the case. The latch was closed. Whatever the chamber had become in those 4 minutes and 31 seconds, the thing that had changed it was already packed away, small, gray, gone. The chamber would have to carry what it had shown them on its own. Farask opened his log to the final entry of the session. He read it again, the way he had read it the night of the session, and the morning after and several times since then, not because he was uncertain about it, but because it was the only entry in 22 rotations that had surprised him when he read it back. Names entered into record per mandate. See also. Footage runtime 0431 origin. Terran Continuance Archive Classification, Incident Documentation Date of Filing, 47 years prior to present session. Note, Transcriptionist Annotation added outside procedural mandate. This log will be incomplete without it. He had never annotated outside his mandate before. He did not think of it as a choice. He thought of it as the log would be incomplete otherwise. He closed the entry. He opened the pre-session briefing for the morning's first item. He read the 2 columns expected duration, outcome, and he picked up his stylus and he began.